Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at a genuinely fascinating paradox in the world of education and global business today. Just imagine dedicating over a decade of your life to studying a single subject. Sitting in classrooms, taking endless tests, logging literally hundreds of hours. You'd completely expect to be a master by the end of it, right? Well, today we're uncovering this central mystery surrounding Thai Business Administration, or BBA students. See, they spend over a dozen years learning English, yet when they're handed a business journal or a trade publication, they just hit a massive wall. So we're going to act as investigators today to figure out exactly why studying a language doesn't automatically equal reading it, and more importantly, how we can actually crack the code to true comprehension.
So I want to pose this question directly to you. Why does 12 years of study equal poor reading comprehension? Honestly, it's a paradox that heavily frustrates educators, employers, and, especially the learners themselves. In a globalized world where English is the dominant language of business, these students are incredibly motivated to succeed. They aren't avoiding the work at all. They're absolutely putting in the time. But that translation from classroom hours to real-world fluent reading comprehension is just somehow getting completely lost in transit.
And to put that into perspective, the sheer scale of this situation is just staggering. According to the research, 72% of surveyed BBA students reported that they had been studying English for 12 years or more. I mean, really think about that. They've reached the level of secondary education or higher, and on average, they're studying English for nearly 9 hours a week. Plus, almost all of them report being exposed to English through TV and radio outside of class. Yet, despite this massive investment of time and energy, they still face these huge reading roadblocks.
So here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. First, the language learning paradox, then gatekeeper to global business, followed by breaking down the barriers, the active reading playbook, teaching with tech, and finally, a blueprint for success.
All right, part 1, the language learning paradox.
The absolute core of this issue really isn't a lack of effort. Actually, it's the method of intake. Thai learners of English as a foreign language are predominantly passive recipients of grammatical structures. For years and years, they've been taught to just memorize grammar rules and vocab words as these isolated little facts rather than actively engaging with complete texts. And because they're conditioned to be passive receivers instead of active readers, consuming real-world English material, things like economic newspapers, trade journals, or financial magazines, becomes this incredibly frustrating challenge.
Which brings us to section 2, gatekeeper to global business.
Now, to fully understand the systemic hurdles these students are up against, we really have to look at how proficiency is actually measured. On one side, you have the Domestic English Proficiency Test, or EPT. It's affordable, costing around 100 to 400 baht, it's highly accessible, and it basically measures general public knowledge. It's comfortable. But on the other side, you have the International TOEFL Test, and this is the real gatekeeper for global mobility. It is insanely expensive, costing anywhere from $140 to $680. It involves strict security, long travel, and these incredibly stressful time constraints. We're talking about having literally only 20 minutes to read a dense, complex text. It's a massive leap required for students to prove their proficiency on a global stage.
Moving on to part 3, breaking down the barriers.
So the really crucial point here is that reading comprehension isn't just one single skill. It's a whole complex web of cognitive and cultural processes. Researchers have actually identified 6 primary hurdles holding readers back. Number 1 is first language interference. 2 is vocabulary uncertainty. 3, unfamiliar topics. 4, unrecognized text structure. 5 is unfamiliar academic strategies. And 6, cultural differences. So when a BBA student sits down with a trade publication, they aren't just battling difficult words. They're actually fighting against all 6 of these cognitive and cultural barriers at the exact same time.
Let's zoom in on the first and honestly most prominent suspect on our list. First language, or L1, interference. This is formally defined as the effect of a learner's native language on the language they're currently trying to learn. In real life, this means students often try to translate an English passage literally word for word into Thai in their heads, or even by using electronic translators or asking friends. But here's the catch. A direct translation completely fails to reflect the author's actual ideas. I mean, we've all seen those hilariously broken automated translations on menus or street signs, right? That is L1 interference in action. It's kind of like trying to understand a beautiful painting by just looking at the chemical makeup of the paint. You get the raw materials, sure, but you completely miss the big picture. And this forces learners to read the same sentences multiple times without ever truly getting the core message.
Okay, let's pivot to solutions in Section 4, the active reading playbook.
And this brilliantly illustrates that good reading doesn't just start at the first word and magically end at the last punctuation mark. It's actually a three-phase chronological journey. Step 1 is pre-reading. This is where you activate your background knowledge, look at titles, and predict what the text is even going to be about. Step 2 is while reading. This is the part where you scan for details, identify main ideas, and constantly monitor your own literal comprehension. And finally, step 3 is post-reading, where you synthesize the information, evaluate the author's claims, and tie it all back to wider business concepts. By explicitly teaching these phases, students learn how to attack a text strategically rather than just passively staring at it.
But we definitely still have work to do, and the data we're looking at right now acts as a vital clue. Look at these mean scores out of 5 for reading comprehension levels among the studied students. For literal comprehension, which is basically just finding the explicitly stated facts on the page, they score a solid 3.20. That's moderate to good, but watch what happens when we go deeper. Interpretive comprehension drops down to 2.65, and critical comprehension, which is the ability to evaluate, synthesize, and truly grasp the broader implications of a business text, that plummets to 2.53. This data shows us exactly where the breakdown happens. Students are doing okay at surface-level reading, but they desperately need the tools to boost that deep, critical interpretation.
Which leads us to part 5, teaching with tech. Turns out, a big part of the answer lies in the devices students are already using every single day. The research strongly advocates moving away from those dusty, static textbooks and instead integrating smartphones, dynamic reading apps, and even group chats. Why? Because it fosters cooperative, modern learning. Setting up a group chat on social networks they already use creates this incredibly easy-to-follow infrastructure for inquiry, guidance, and just sharing ideas. When students can instantly discuss an article on their phones, compare their answers, and use text simplifiers digitally, you see a massive spike in student satisfaction and way better adoption of those active reading strategies we just talked about.
Let's see how this actually builds into tangible results. Researchers tracked the impact of a targeted 12-session course called Effective Reading Skills that fully integrated these modern active strategies. They watched students grow from a pre-test to a post-test, and the growth was, frankly, significant. By focusing on clear reading objectives, fast scanning, and comprehension monitoring, the students showed a massive improvement. And this was particularly true in understanding causal relationships and synthesis, literally the exact critical thinking areas they were previously struggling with. This basically proves that with the right tech-enabled strategic intervention, this 12-year mystery can absolutely be solved.
Finally, Section 6, a blueprint for success.
So, bringing it all together, here is the blueprint that educators and learners need to follow to survive and honestly thrive in the globalized business landscape. 1. We absolutely must shift from passive grammar decoding to active strategy use. That means utilizing those pre-, while, and post-reading techniques. 2. We have to leverage technology and social media to make reading engaging and relevant to their actual lives. 3. We need to focus heavily on high-level skills like fast scanning and contextual prediction, rather than just getting bogged down in word-for-word translation. And 4. We must adopt collaborative group learning, because when it comes down to it, analyzing complex business texts is absolutely a team sport.
The source material actually leaves us with this really powerful reminder. It says, reading development is a long-term commitment, more so than the development of the other skills. Skill cannot be developed without practice. There is no magic pill here, folks. There are 0 shortcuts. Cracking the code of reading comprehension requires dedicated, strategic, and consistent practice over time. But armed with the right playbook, it is 100% achievable.
So I'm going to turn it over to you. Looking at this active reading toolkit we've laid out today, everything from predicting content to fast scanning, all the way to post-reading synthesis, what strategies will you use the next time you sit down to read? Take a moment and think about how you can shift from being a passive consumer of words to an active constructor of meaning. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, happy reading.